Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/malicious compliance, where people follow orders to the T to spite someone. And in this episode, it's all about people teaching bad bosses a lesson, and OP teaches one smug, arrogant boss a lesson they'll never forget. The story is absolutely wild. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's lineup. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Do you know that guy at work that everyone hates? The rude, obnoxious, lazy one that no one quite understands how he still has a job? Well, mine happened to be my lead, and his name was Bob. When this happened, I was a lowly apprentice, and Bob was an actual journeyman that I worked under. For months, Bob partnered himself up with me with a lovely 90-10 split of the work. And any time I called him out on it, he just got more and more obnoxious. And if it was actually possible, the guy did less and less work. Now, on top of all of his other charming traits, Bob is an absolute phone addict. This is bad enough in a regular setting, but where we work, it's actually very, very dangerous to not be paying attention to what's going on around you. I've mentioned this to Bob repeatedly to no avail, even after he was nearly hit by a forklift. Our manager at the time just said, if you're stupid enough to die because you won't put your phone down and pay attention, no one's going to miss you. And he ignored the behavior. My last straw at even attempting to get this guy to work and be safe was him snapping off and saying, "Leave me alone about my effing phone, just get the work done." After that, I decided to just comply. We had just got a new manager, partially because of our former manager's attitude towards safety issues, and partly because of poor performance. The new manager had a quick, to-the-point meeting at the beginning of our shift, where he very clearly states, "If I see your phone while you're on the floor, you're fired. No excuses, no exceptions." And the thing is, Bob had missed this meeting because he was running late yet again. About 2 hours later, I see the new manager walking to our area. Bob, as usual, had his head down, staring at his phone. Now, remember when he specifically said to leave him alone about his effing phone and not bother him? Well, that's exactly what I did. Our new boss wound up standing behind him for a solid 3 minutes before Bob even noticed he was there. Bob was then promptly escorted to HR, and I was apologized to by the new manager because I'd have to run the work area solo until a replacement was found. It was no big loss to me. The extra 10% of work is well worth knowing that that guy won't be around anymore. I guess no one at that job will bother him about his phone again. Yeah, all I can say is good frickin' riddance, because Bob was a huge liability to the company. And honestly, him getting fired potentially saved his life. Like, we all know phone addiction is over the top these days, and working in an industry where you're surrounded by heavy equipment and potentially dangerous hazards, you have to be alert and aware all the time. It's common sense. And I only say that because I used to work in the construction industry, guys, and I've seen idiots try to multitask, running the crane with one hand while texting with the other. And I can tell you, bosses are not happy when 1-ton beams get rammed into concrete walls. So yeah, don't be a Bob. And this person comments, "Your former manager deserved to be let go. I worked with a group of construction guys in a tight-knit community once upon a time, and the manager was absolutely rabid about following safety precautions to the letter. It seems a couple of years prior, he allowed an employee a little grace on being slightly lax on security procedures, and that employee died in a workplace accident, and he said he'll never forgive himself for the way his friend's widow looked at him at the funeral. Now, when guys groan about safety, he just tells them, shut up, sit down, listen, learn, follow. I promise that I will fire all of you before I risk burying one of you." They believed him. We ran a very safe shop. And one more thing, I also love that there was no way that Bob could have argued it. Because a lot of guys I used to work with, they would pull the, "Oh, I just took it out of my pocket right now. My wife just texted me." You know, the average excuse. But it's a little hard to use that excuse when the boss has been behind you watching you for 3 whole minutes. Oh, what a great story that was. Okay, so this is not my story, but I thought it's worthy to share. For some background, my friend is now my husband's best friend. They met while overseas, and they've been best friends and roommates on and off, basically until we bought our own home. They're basically brothers, and quite the package deal. Anyways, I'll call my buddy Mac. Mac was a road trucker at the time, and he was working for an entry-level company. Now, these companies do have their place, since they help people acquire experience so other companies will accept you. Unfortunately, the downside to companies like these are as follows. Number 1, inexperienced drivers. Number 2, many of the instructors are also fairly inexperienced. Number 3, the pay is mediocre for industry standards. And number 4, the dispatchers often ask for unreasonable/undrivable tasks, and they don't reward home time very easily, and you're basically just a number. People generally put up with companies like this at first, to get their feet wet, to gain those precious miles and years, to make them more hireable down the road, so to speak. Anyways, Mac had been driving for this company for approximately a year, when he got a phone call. He was halfway across the country when he was told that his best friend, my current husband, was in the hospital with a potentially fatal infection. Of course, upon hearing that, Mac immediately calls dispatch to inform them that he was making an immediate U-turn and heading straight home, as it was a family emergency. And here's where the compliance comes in. They told him that if he deviates from his route in any way, that he would be fired immediately. They didn't care he might lose his best friend. The load he was hauling had to make it on time. They just told Mac to suck it up and do his job. To which he said, "Fine, I quit." He then pulled over at the nearest truck stop, parking the truck thousands of miles from his home base, and he left it. He just cleaned it out and he took a Greyhound home, if memory serves. His old company had to have his fully loaded trailer towed thousands of miles. Not only that, they were also late on the precious delivery of what was on his trailer, and let me tell you, nothing about that is cheap. Mac now works for a smaller family-owned company, and he's home daily, or at least every weekend, and he's paid so much better. This story always cracks me up, and no, I don't recommend doing this. And for anyone asking about my husband, he's fine. He recovered. Guys, good on Mac for putting his foot down, right? And having worked with truck drivers before, I know how important it is for loads to get delivered on time. And like OP said, things probably got really expensive for that company. With that said though, I don't know what trucking companies usually do when their employees have family emergencies and they're on the road. I'm assuming they dispatch a nearby replacement driver. That would make the most sense. And guys, let me know if you agree with what Mac did, because some people are arguing that he was a complete a-hole for doing that. In my opinion though, they totally deserved it, because some employers are just absolutely a-holes. You need to decide what's more important, my company, where we treat you like a number, or your best friend's life. And guys, apparently this does happen a lot, where drivers just abandon their trucks to spite their a-hole bosses. And this person says this is a common thing in the trucking industry. The company's actually very lucky that the driver parked the rig at a truck stop. A few years back, a driver just parked his rig smack across the main road. The guy got out with his truck running, locked the door, and just walked away. I had to make a 20-mile detour to get home from work, and I still thought it was hilarious. Alright, so this happened about 13 years ago. I was a field service engineer for a national retail chain. Basically, I was the IT guy who drove around in a company vehicle servicing computer networks in the stores. The way the company was organized is there was corporate employees and then there was retail employees. Being a corporate employee, I received corporate stock as a small part of my salary. And the starting pay was 3 times the rate of any store manager. Now, because I was always putting out fires, I often found myself in the awkward position of dealing with store managers who honestly thought that they were the store owners and that I was the hired help. And seriously, this was truly ironic, as I actually did own a very small piece of the corporation, whereas the average store manager did not. So one day, I got orders to replace a server in a store, not too far from my house. So I show up to the store where the server needs to be replaced. It was my second stop of 3 scheduled that day. I walk inside the store wearing my very obvious corporate uniform with name tag and logo. This is when the store owner, retail manager, instantly demands to know what the F I'm doing in her store. Now I get this all the time, it's nothing new. I calmly explain that my boss wants me to upgrade the store servers, a hardware replacement, and I can even show her where it is that I'll be working. I then explain it'll take about an hour and that the point of sales registers might go offline for about 5 minutes. Hearing that, she isn't happy, but she reluctantly allows me into the room where the server is, and I start working. When I'm just about done, the point of sales registers go down, as I'm switching them to a new server which is not fully hooked up yet. It was at this point I realized that I've forgotten to bring in a couple of cables that I need to finish hooking up the new server. So I run to my truck to get the cables. I'm gone for about 2 minutes. When I get back to the store, the manager's sitting at the table in front of the server, and she's got food spread out all over the table. The server's under the table. I then tell the store manager that I need to finish hooking up the server, gesturing under the table. That's when the store manager tells me that I'll have to come back in 1 hour, after her lunch break. And hearing her say that, I'm shocked into total silence. That's when a cashier burst into the room, panicked that the registers aren't working, and the checkout lines are backed up. I then explain to the manager that I have to fix the server right now or the registers will not work. And what she says next, I will never forget. She looks at me and says, "Well, you should have thought of that before you started working in my break area." I just calmly tell the store manager that she'll have to take a break later or find somewhere else to eat her lunch. She then tells me that I'm rude and incompetent and she demands to speak to my manager immediately and to put him on the phone right now. And in my head, I'm thinking, okie dokie. So I call up my manager using my corporate issued phone and quickly explain the situation, and then walk into the server room to hand the phone to the store manager. While she's on the phone with my manager, I head to the front of the store to explain that the registers are down for a few more minutes. Now, I can't exactly hear what the store manager is saying to my manager, but I can tell that she's in a heated conversation, and I clearly hear the words "fired" mentioned a few times. It's very clear that she wants me fired for daring to interrupt her lunch break. Unfortunately for her, my direct supervisor was about 5 to 6 levels above the retail district manager. So basically, this store manager was complaining loudly about interrupting my work to the manager of her manager's 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 manager. A few minutes later, the store manager walks out of the room, awkwardly balancing bits and pieces of her lunch spread. I immediately go back to work, getting the new server up and running and rebooting the point of sales registers so they'll sync with the new server and the cashiers can get back to work. Everyone is now happy except for the store manager because her lunch break was ruined. The main part of my task is done now, but it does take me another 15 minutes to clean up my mess. As I'm doing this, I see the retail district manager, who I've met before, going into the store. About 10 minutes later, she walks back out of the store with the former store manager, who's now carrying a box of her personal items. She was fired all in the span of an hour. Now isn't that satisfying, guys? A power-tripping Karen manager who thinks she's the almighty store owner absolutely getting destroyed. And seriously, this is instant karma right there, because you know for a fact that Karen ate her lunch there to be petty towards OP. And this is exactly what she gets. I only wish I could see her face when she realizes that she was complaining to somebody 5 levels above her. Like, cue the audio of that guy saying, "It's in this moment she knew she mucked up." Like, it doesn't cost anything to be respectful and nice, and if Karen knew that, she might still have a job. Actually, she probably would still have a job. And guys, if you think that one was satisfying, listen to this next one. Here's the setting. This happened about 8 years ago, when I worked for one of the biggest hotels in the US. I'm talking about 3,200 rooms, and that place is the size of a small city. My position was the supervisor of special operations, which means I was the guy they came to when they needed to change like 1,000 bed frames or change 5,000 light bulbs, stuff like that. Now, a hotel this big is divided into 4 buildings, each with their own managers, supervisors, housekeeping, and the like. Essentially, it was run like 4 separate hotels. Now, the problem with that is each building's manager had a lot of power, and they end up stepping on each other's toes day in and day out. Now, because of my position, I did not work directly for any of them. I worked for the director of housekeeping. So whenever one of them tried to get me to take special care of them in their buildings, I could easily refuse. But most of the time, I did whatever they needed to get done because they were mostly nice people and good managers. Enter Ken, the worst manager that I've ever encountered in my career. The guy would go to the checkout rooms and he would steal tips from the housekeepers. He would also take things left behind by guests instead of reporting them to Lost and Found. And he would talk to people like they owed him something, like his word was the law. So with all of that, here's the story. So one day, we get a VIP guest. He was one of the owners of the company that owned the hotel. So my boss, the director of housekeeping, sends me to check the room that he's to check in the next day. So I did. I checked all the furniture, the bed frame, the mattress, the lamps, the light bulbs, the AC unit, everything I could think of. And when I'm done, I give the good to go. Fast forward 1 week, the day after VIP checked out. I get called into my boss's office and the conversation goes something like this. He says to me, so the VIP had a complaint about his room. I ask, did I miss something? He says to me, not really, it was housekeeping who did. He noticed that one of his pillows was stained. Now, the thing is, the pillows are in this protective cover inside a pillowcase, so he had to have taken out both to notice it was stained. He requested another one, which was also stained. I say to my boss, and you want me to do something about it. My boss tells me, I want you to check all the pillows during renovations. Just take all the stained ones out of the rooms and send them to laundry, and then place them back into the rooms. I tell him that's gonna take me a couple of days and some overtime, but okay. The hotel was scheduled for renovations about 3 weeks from the date of the VIP pillow incident. The hotel was supposed to be shut down for 2 weeks, and outside contractors would come in and do the work. During this time, I was supposed to stand by and help out the contractors with whatever they needed. But because of the pillow incident, I now had something to do. So I had my instructions from my boss, and the day rolls by, and me and my team get to work. About halfway through the first building, I get a call on the radio from Ken, the bad manager, asking me where I was. My boss, the director of housekeeping, had a family emergency and he was out of town, leaving Ken in charge of overseeing operations until he got back. I respond with my location and I get back to work. About 10 minutes later, Ken enters the room I'm currently in, and the conversation goes like this. He basically yells and says, "You are going to throw away all the stained pillows." To which I say, now why would I do that? I have clear instructions from the director of housekeeping. Ken then tells me, well, he isn't here, and I'm telling you to throw away all the stained pillows. As soon as he finished the sentence, he turns around and he starts walking away. I just say, but... And that's when Ken loses it, and he screams at me and says, "You are nothing more than a glorified janitor. You will do as you're told. You will throw away all the stained pillows and leave the thinking to the people with college degrees." Now, in my mind, that was a little rude, to which I said nothing but okay. After he left, I called my team on a different radio frequency and let them know the new plan. I get a lot of seriously and what the Fs, so I tell them that's what the boss man wants and that's what the boss man will get. Anyways, we get back to work with our new orders, pulling the stained pillows from the room. Remember, about 3,200 rooms, so it takes us about 3 days. During this time, we didn't just dump the pillows as we went. We stashed them in a storage room by the dumpster. It also turns out that most of the pillows were stained, so we're talking about 15,000 pillows. After we're done, I just emailed Ken and I said all of the stained pillows have been pulled and they're on standby. Again, should I just take them to laundry like I was told to do, or should I proceed to dump them? To which he replied in the email, "Are you deaf? Throw them away like I told you to when I saw you." And this is where my malicious compliance comes into play. So me and my team proceed to ask around staff, and we gave a bunch of them away before filling our 4 dumpsters with nothing but pillows. So a few days go by, and I'm just helping out the contractors when I get this email from Ken saying, "Why aren't there pillows in the rooms yet? It's your responsibility." To which I replied, "We don't have enough pillows for all the rooms, even with the stash we have," which was an extra 500 pillows, give or take. I tell Ken we don't even have enough for 1 building. He then replied, "What do you mean we don't have enough? How many pillows did you throw away?" And my response was, "You told me to throw away all the stained ones, so I did. About 15,000 pillows." To which he replied, 15,000? Are you effing stupid? How could you be such an imbecile? Now what are we supposed to do? We can't delay the reopening. My response was, I'm just a glorified janitor, and I can only follow orders. I guess I'll leave the thinking to the people with college degrees. And oh man, he lost it. He then proceeds to call my boss on his personal phone, who was out of town attending his father's funeral. Ken then goes off. He starts belittling me, saying how incompetent I am, how I threw away all the pillows I was supposed to have washed, like the guy was trying to get me fired. That's when I get a text from my boss that said, "Ken told me what you did. We'll talk about it when I get back in 2 days." Now, during those 2 days, I compiled a folder with the email thread of the pillow conversation. And since I don't have access to the security mainframe, I went to my buddy, who's the security manager, and I checked the cameras and I found the footage of him telling me that I'm nothing but a glorified janitor and to leave the thinking to the college graduates. And I do want to note that there's no cameras in the hotel rooms, but the hallway camera caught the audio. The 2 days went by, and as soon as I came in the next morning to pick up my radio, I get a call from my boss to meet him in his office, so I head there with my folder and my footage in hand. When I walked in, he was sitting in his desk, with Ken standing right next to him. The conversation went like this. My boss tells me to take a seat, so I take a seat. He then says to me, "Would you care to explain the situation that you've put us in? Throwing away 15,000 pillows? What were you thinking?" I then tell him, "Let me explain." No problem. I pulled out my folder, opened it, put it on his desk, and pushed it towards him. My boss spends a couple of minutes reading it, including the transcription from the security footage. And when I can tell he's done reading, I say they wouldn't let me take a copy of the security footage as per policy, but you can talk to the security manager and he can show it to you. He then looks at Ken with raised eyebrows and then looks at me and says, "Would you excuse us for a moment?" I just nod, get up, and walk out. About 30 minutes later, out comes Ken with the biggest puppy who peed on the carpet and got hit with a rolled up newspaper face that I've ever seen. My boss then signals me to come in and he says, "Mr. Ken has decided to take some personal time, indefinitely. Carry on with your day." And that's the story of how a manager tried to get me fired because of his stupidity, and it just didn't work and backfired on him. Guys, I love this story so much. I love it when power-tripping bosses muck up so badly and then try to throw a lowly employee under the bus to save themselves, and it backfires so bad like that. And this is why you have to cover your butt when it comes to stuff like this. Like, OP totally made the right decision asking Ken and confirming over email. Because you know for a fact that if it was a verbal conversation, you can bet that Ken would have turned that around so fast on OP. Well frickin' done. And for all who are curious, OP did come into the comments and said the delay for reopening was 2 days. But for a place that big, they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oh my goodness. So, to clarify a few things, this happened in Europe. I was a salaried employee working 40 hours a week. I left that job about 10 months after the event took place. I didn't get into trouble and nobody tried to fire me. So with that information, about 4 years ago, I started a new banking job. All was well, just that management was pretty strict with timekeeping, which was weird because we were back office. My experience was in a similar field at another bank, and we had flexible schedules and received time in lieu. But rules are rules, so I followed them. I learned my tasks and got to know the wider team. Anyways, about 4 months in, I start to realize that my senior manager did not like me. I'm pretty assertive as a person, and I do know how to stand up for myself, and the guy hated it. I would speak up during meetings, ask questions, give suggestions, and so on, while the team would stay quiet. The week everything went south, I was working overtime, which was obviously unpaid. On Thursday, I did nearly 2 hours of overtime. On Friday, I thought I'd leave a few minutes early as I was done for the week. The manager was off, so I left 10 minutes early. On Monday, when I came to work, I get called into a meeting straight away. There was 3 of us in the room, myself, my manager, and my senior manager. The conversation went as follows. So my manager says to me, "I heard you left work early on Friday." I tell him I did. I left 10 minutes early. My manager then proceeds to say, "Did you ask for permission to leave early?" To which I say, "It was 10 minutes. I did about 4 hours of overtime last week. Why are we having this conversation?" The senior manager says, "Because you left early without asking for permission. As a senior, you should be setting an example for the rest of the team." I just ask, "Is this a joke?" The senior manager goes on and says, "Your working hours are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., not 9 a.m. to 5:50 p.m. You do not get to leave early without asking for your manager or my permission first. Is that clear?" I reply, "Got it. It's perfectly clear." So I listened. I start coming to the office at 9 a.m. and leaving at 6 on the dot. At first, they didn't realize what was happening. But the week after the meeting was the last week of the month. And let's just say the last week of every month was intense. Especially the final day. Month end, they call it. That's where reports had to be completed, signed off, and submitted. We covered multiple jurisdictions, and we would deal with Southeast Asia in the morning and Americas in the evening. Our team was expected to work overtime due to this. With that, here comes Friday, the last day of the month. Showtime. I'm at my desk 9 a.m. sharp. Most of the team had been at the office for at least an hour. I, of course, have a cup of coffee from the cafeteria because I was still a bit early. My manager just looks at me and raises his eyebrow, but he doesn't say anything. I then do my work, and break time comes around. We had two 20-minute paid breaks, and I'm the only person to go on my break. At lunchtime, everybody was eating at their desks while I go meet my friends for lunch. On second break, I once again leave my workplace and I go for a short stroll around. I then go back to work. About 5:45, I get this call from one of the senior managers in the US. She needs a report amended. There was 4 of us on that call, and I'm doing the amendments as we speak, and I'm closely keeping my eye on the time. I then see it's about 2 minutes to 6, and then 1 minute to 6. The senior manager's rambling about the report, and that's when I interrupt her and say, "Apologies, but I have to stop you right here." She says, "Yes?" I say, "It's 6 p.m. here, my day's over." She then questions what I said, and I say, "As per my management, my working hours are 9 to 6 p.m. So I must leave right now. Have a great weekend. We'll catch up on Monday." I then logged off, got my coat, wished everyone a great weekend, and left. It was 6:04 p.m. Both my manager and my senior manager were dumbfounded by what happened. They were looking pale and they stare at me in disbelief. It was a glorious sight. I did want to apologize to my senior manager that I wasn't able to leave at 6 p.m. on the dot, but I thought that might have been way too passive-aggressive, so I just left. I relaxed the rule a bit after a few months, yet I never did more than 30 minutes of overtime. Ironically, once my stakeholders understood that I wasn't available for 10+ hours, they start collaborating earlier in the month. I would have most of my reports done and submitted by the last day of the month. Guys, I'm pretty sure this is a malicious compliance a lot of employees pull on their bosses. Like, it is so stupid how some workplaces you can't leave 10 minutes early without getting crap for it. But at the same time, they expect you to stay and work hours and hours of unpaid overtime. This person comments, "This is a malicious compliance I can get behind. You are entitled to take your breaks, and if they're not going to pay overtime, you shouldn't have to work it." Management knows this. That's why all they could do was raise their eyebrows. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's on our entitled People episode, where a psycho Karen refuses to go to jail after stealing from somebody. It's such a wild story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.